Afternoon, everyone. We're going to be speaking, my name is Tisetso Musi. I'm with Katleho Lebete and Peter Groenewald. We're going to be talking now about music in architecture. Just to give you a brief summary of that, you can look at it from different spectrums. I think all of us will share how we see it. You can look at it from the point of theaters, you can look at a point from acoustics in architecture, you can look at it a point from designing using rhythm and all these things that are associated with music in a sense, right? Or you can look at it from a spectrum of the architecture that influenced, or should I say the music that influenced architecture, or vice versa, because it can go either way, such as hip hop in the US, and you see how the slums sadly has influenced their music and how they produce it. Or you can look at it from a different angle where you say the jazz, how it influences their theaters, as well as opera, how it influences their architecture.
So architecture, in terms of how it holds music, it can vary from, for instance, you have Beyonce who does her concerts on a very large scale, but the technical abilities to pull that off means sound is behaving in various different ways, which might be difficult to navigate at such a large scale. Trevor Noah actually has explained how when you're in a venue that's too big, you'll get the lag between what's happening at the stage and what's happening in the back being noticeably different.
1.2 seconds is the delay response that is deemed unacceptable.
Yes, and now obviously now you know the reverberation, the echo, and so on and so forth, which makes it difficult for you to even follow what's being said. However, venues of a large accommodation scale is what we need in some cases. I mean, where did Beyonce went to the FNB Stadium, which looks like a bowl next to Soweto, and apparently it was absolutely awesome, except it was not a regular budget for you to go to that concert and get good seats.
People like stop paying for their kids' medical aid, and some people resigned just to go see Beyonce.
I don't understand this obsession with Beyonce.
I don't get
Brilliant artist, beautiful vocals, great tracks. Just don't understand the obsession.
The obsession is too much. Is it fine if I just say let's break it down, because like we said, there's a lot we can touch on when it comes to this. So let's break it down from how we say music will influence, or should I say architecture will influence the individual who produces the music, right? Can we start from there?
Yes, well, historically, if you look at, let's start with just before music plays. So the way the Greeks designed their amphitheaters, it reverberated a certain way that is longer than what it's used to. So it's usually at 23.2 degree incline that the seats were, and that reverberation of the sound falling over each other could be heard much further than usual. But because of that, they pronounced things in a certain way. That goes down to how theaters are designed as well, on how the acoustics reverberate from the top and the bottom, and that influences how the play acts. So the way they pronounce, the pauses they have, so certain words are heard better than others. Enunciations. And that's also where the mid-Atlantic accent comes from. You hear that in music, where British and American people sound kind of the same, although if they speak, they sound completely different. That came of how the acoustics reflect. Then we can go to recording studios, where recording studios were originally designed for a big volume, so they get instruments in that reverberate in a certain way, because if you have a smallish space, only vocals will work, soft vocals. You can't get a drum kit or a piano or something in there. Then
too much noise and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yes, and then you get your reverberation chambers that were in studios where usually it was like a 3x3 meter room, and you get that techno reverb. That was that, and then it became smaller with time as technology progressed. So architecture was designed to maximize a sound in a certain way, and that influenced how plays are done, written, how people think, how people pronounce things, and that's how it influenced cultures. Then you can get architecture where in Rome, where they did public speaking at the Forum, they designed buildings in such a way that it doesn't reflect sound. So the person elevating his voice doesn't get a reverb back or somebody in the square hears the sounds at two different angles. It was made to absorb or completely diffract the sound away. Again, it's how architecture used sound to manipulate us in a certain way.
Now, obviously through time, we've developed musical instruments and technologies which allow you to occupy a smaller space than you needed before, especially in recording, right? We also have now how that same sound translates into live performance and how there's a lot more flexibility and creativity on the stage, but the venue also has to be able to host that. Depending on the shape of a place, of an auditorium, a square versus an oval shape versus a fan, all of those have effect on the quality of sound that your listener is experiencing. And for instance, a square shape where the walls are parallel to each other, that has a tendency of reverbing more and causing a bit of a sound dissonance, which isn't comfortable if you're trying to achieve a certain kind of pleasurable sound experience. Whereas the fan has a tendency of being not only beneficial for the viewer and the listener, it's also beneficial for the product that your artist is actually projecting. So back to what TC was saying in terms of environments and how, for instance, in South Africa, for some reason, we have a lot of musical artists coming from very culturally isolated places such as Mafeking, such as Durban, and so on and so forth. I look at it and I'm thinking, was it even the architecture that influences that kind of environment, or it's the political influence and the administration of the area that sort of sparked or encouraged creativity, and then it manifested in the architecture, which then carried the whole creative culture even further and pushed them even better to achieve a certain amount of excellence. So it's architecture in terms of its human influence. We know hands down that it does a lot in terms of, I mean, when you started with your blacksmiths who in your Europe during the winter era, they had a fire going all the time, and because of that confinement of space, snow, and the hostility of the environment, they were able to develop more technology because they were sitting still for much longer in a warm, comfortable, environmentally sound place, right? Whereas you get a different kind of evolution in Africa where everybody's outside in the sun, and they
running around with drums and stuff.
No, so houses are much more small because the weather is much more pleasant for longer. Houses are much more small. People choose outside activity against inside activity. Again, with the blacksmith analogy, blacksmithing was done more outside in the open weather, maybe in a small pit, than the European or Iranian versions, which was done under a house roof.
So now, how did that influence music? Now, whether it's in terms of now time and how you occupy time when your environment is hostile, that produces a different evolution in terms of musical instruments, and sophistication and metalwork now translates into the musical instruments themselves. You also have now the writing of music in those same spheres, and the evolution of collaboration at a much more deeper level, and a grander sophistication. Now, when all of that translates across cultures, it becomes interesting in terms of how human beings, their occupation of space, and their generation of music, their production of music, their presentation of music.
It follows. I think on top of that, when you speak about being confined in a space, or I think we can just break it up a bit and say again that if you are in a space where you're continuously using something, right? It can be a piece of rope and something like that, and you find a particular sound that you like and you start humming to it and stuff like that. It goes back to that they start finding sounds that they can make music with, and that also is an influence. Then, because it also relates with the Tswana side, there's an artist in my head and I'm forgetting his name. Yeah, I think he was my basketball coach when I was still young. He's an artist, he's a Tswana artist, and his instruments are so unconventional. It's like things he made up, right? And he speaks Tswana poetry on top of the music, right? And you could ask yourself back on that point, what was he doing to you to find that instrument? Because I don't know that instrument.
Well,
right?
all music comes from others. The first musical instruments a person will hear is your mother humming to you as a child. And
Or your mother's heartbeat while you're still.
exactly. All of the music comes from the mothers. Some of the oldest stuff we know that influenced music comes from that deep humming and the deep sounds of a heart. And people in history always try to contrast it with something light and sharp, rather, because that's immediately noticeable. But if we look at how, let's start with drums, one of the oldest instruments on earth. Why do we get drumming circles? Worldwide, it's a human nature thing. It's because the sounds play easier off of each other, facing each other. And different cultures have different forms of drums to echo that sound or reverberate that sound in the area. Where in Africa you have much more of the kraal feel of a more circular system, where your audience will either sit in or around you and not to one direction. Where in Europe it was different because that was more in-house than outside, and that shaped the acoustics of the instruments you're going to use. Because if you have an instrument that's more projected to one direction, let's say a violin or a guitar, it's going to be completely different to, let's say, a drum, I can't even think, or a flute, for that instance.
So now from this conversation, just the first part now, I'm understanding and I'm seeing a point of contextualization of music, or should I say how it's produced, because you spoke about theaters, how they were done. You spoke about the spaces that they worked at and lived at and how it influenced their music, right? So now that's just one part. Now it goes to the other way around, right? Because music is not just about making music. Music is an art, right? And art is one of the highest, in my opinion, one of the highest things or highest pure forms of humanity, right? Like literally human, not just it exists, no, humanity, because it shows
Self-actualization.
right? So you know I am because you created something and we can note you from that, and it goes between, or it goes through everything, arts such as visual, sound and stuff like that, so people are expressing themselves. So now that's the second point I want to get to, the expression side, but now forced through by the architecture, not built up by architecture, forced by architecture. Because it, for example, just so you can understand what I'm saying, at the beginning of the video I mentioned what is this, hip hop, right? And I think we can backtrack a bit to the blues, right? Where they would make music about
their blueness, as in their sadness.
Their sadness, exactly, right?
They're longing.
They're longing. So there's a lot of emotions that was in it, right? But immediately you hear that music, there's an architecture you already have in mind. There's already a setting for it when you hear the music. Louisiana, the type of infrastructure, everything already when you hear that has a context, right? But it wasn't a context that they were given. It wasn't a context that just came freely to them. It was a context that was forced onto them, and the music came from it, right? And then we go to the hip hop side, where it started nice, where they were like, yes, this, I was with my mama. Then it changes slowly to a very violent shootings, blocks, I'm gonna get you on the other side. When you realize it's all through the same context, and you realize, okay, at some point the infrastructure was no longer working for them and they wanted to leave, but there was nowhere else to go because they were not allowed to go.
Well, even on that, if we look at a lot of Nigerian music from the early 2000s, it was there was a lot of political commentating on the music, and a lot of the crowds they attract were political activists, where they use their music to let them know and explain and tell people, and that rhythm stuck in their head and they could spread the word. So that context of oppression, infrastructure-wise, political-wise, forced music in certain directions in certain areas in the world.
Yes, and then it goes full circle because now, remember, when you like something, you adopt it, right? When you are familiar with something, you adopt it. So I could be living the best life here as a normal person, but due to the fact that I'm affiliated with music that is in this direction, I'm continuously going to be thinking the same way, right? And if someone is to say, hey, make a rap song now, you're going to end up rapping about guns, because that's what you fed yourself, right? But now that's not your context. So now you end up putting yourself in that context because that's what you think about. So it's now an influence that was forced onto someone that expresses it, then it's influencing the other person who has nothing to do with it. And now their architecture also changes because they're not familiar with the new content. I don't know if I'm making sense, because it's like, how do I put this? Back to the Tswana guy, all right? When I listen to his music, I want to go back and live back at the farm.
Okay.
Right? Why? Because he makes that type of music. He makes poetic music. He makes music where you feel like, you just want to be free, go, deal with your sheep there, and, simple stuff. Like, he just takes you back. And then there's other music that makes you feel like you want to live a classical life. You want to go out to opera music. You want to go listen to that.
You want to go to a museum.
You want to go to a museum and act like you're, bougie. But, but all that stuff. And then there's music that makes you feel like you can go into the hood. Like, yeah, well, I'm from here, right? But you're not from there. That's what I'm saying in that case.
Well, that's the influence of media in general.
Yeah.
I mean, but at the same time, because we're focusing in on architecture, which is a topic that could go in various different tangents, we're trying to get to a point where we're thinking about the design of architecture and its influences over music and the music over the people, right?
Well, we can also take on the music influence on architecture. Look at the Dome in Las Vegas, well, the Sphere with all that. The reason they did that is that music artists can be much more visual. The first people that performed there is U2, who are renowned of putting on a show, not just music, but visuals and themes. And
by the way, U2 does have an architect that works with them when they set up and occupy a space.
I did not know that.
That's a temporary architecture.
The one who plays with light, because I know he's done a few things with.
Well, this is
the guy who made the artificial light, the artificial sun. I forgot his name. He's an architect that usually plays with light and.
No, I need to go read that up.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have to just get that and put that information there as well. But yeah, because I know he also does stage designs. He did some stuff for beyond, actually a lot of artists. But yeah.
But you understand now that even in the temporary occupation, I mean, what's Coachella?
What is Coachella?
I think there was Francis Gehry or David Ajay, who did a installation at one of the two previous Coachellas, I think.
I have no idea.
But either way, the occupation of architects in the space of music and music in the space of architects. Typical example, the Walt.
David Ajay was busy building concerts.
Walt Disney Theater, which was designed by Frank Gehry.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which looks like the building looks like music. It just happens to also hold music.
Clear, typical. Clearly.
So it's very interesting interpretations of architecture and how the merger of architecture and music can be symbiotic.
Okay, what building would you tell people to go look at if they want an example of music and architecture?
The Walt Disney Theater by Frank Gehry.
Okay. I don't have a building in mind. I would just say you should just go through the history of where this music was made, because you will understand and you will see the context of it. And then once you understand that part, you understand in future when you're designing for something or someone who's affiliated or is used to, as usual is a certain type of music listener to or an audience, then you understand what they want. Because again, people in large concerts, rock and stuff like that, they probably want a black building. Context, if you go through that, this is for usually, I think for students, I think you understand a bit more on history when it comes to that. It's an interesting point to look at, because if I give you buildings, there's multiple buildings that were done properly. And then, yeah, all of them are suited for their audience. They're not suited for everyone, but they're suited for their particular audience. Yeah.
Also, go look at the Finnish theatre in Helsinki by Alvar Aalto. He was a absolute master when it comes to acoustic engineering.
Yeah.
That's my point I like about.
The person who I would really love to hear from regarding this topic is Uffe Ntshipitse, the architect and orchestral conductor who happened to have done the music for, I think, one of the Bridgerton series. Look, dude, I'm not discriminating against those kinds of, what do you call them, series. And this is our context. We are in Tshwane. We are at the Tshwane University of Technology, Pretoria, South Africa.
My favorite band is Pretorian. It's also grew up here, but I don't believe you guys would know them. It's called Bitreinder.
I don't know it. You knew it. You heard it right off the bat. Yeah, you don't know it.
You will like it. It's much more hip hop than anything else.
You have to put it on the thing as well. Tell them that.
I don't want to make you cry.
Okay, never mind. You can keep it.
No, it's just deep music.
How deep though? Like, is it the type that you want sad architecture?
It's not. It's sad. It's, again, the way they express themselves is the situation in South Africa where in the early 2000s there was a crisis of identity in Afrikaners, because they didn't want to be associated with apartheid. They wanted to be in the new South Africa, and the identity, because Afrikaners had a lot of kickback for it. So either you're immediately against it and then you kind of like against everything that, or you're trying to embrace it and you just lost your identity. So they explored the identity of being a white South African in Pretoria and how to fit in the community. And it's just absolutely beautiful, deep hip hop in it. It's just absolutely amazing.
I think we have been unfair in this case, because now saying this, I never thought about that. Like the breakaway point of, because obviously there was apartheid supporters and there were non-apartheid supporters on both sides, right? Okay, and I never thought about the white side where they were opposed for it, and how was it for them?
Yeah, but remember, it's not. I would say it's what's in the spotlight now. Yeah. But the white Afrikaners are not the only one that had a crisis of identity after 1994. Because the little I know of Zulu was that after 1994, when everything happened, the monarchy had a bit of a crisis of identity, because where do they fit in the new democracy? Yeah. They came to an understanding with the ANC government, but the expropriation without compensation issue with that is in direct conflict with their trust, the amount of land they said. So they again having a crisis there. But then you also have the ANC, who kind of ruled mostly in KwaZulu-Natal in the apartheid years, trying to get the apartheid government to pay them more, and that was also a conflict with the IFP supporters as well as the monarchy. So the moment that apartheid ended, there was that bit of crisis, and that's where leaders came out, because they took identity and went with it. So yes, what I listen to I can associate with, but I'm also aware it's not the only crisis of identity in this new age we have, and that's something that also is expressed in some of the songs, because they get collaborators to come and talk about it. So I think but we're getting off topic now.
We're getting off topic.
It speaks of that, to me, speaks about the apartheid architecture, which now post 1994 and the establishment of a so-called democracy in South Africa has manifested it into a whole new evolution and direction of a nation which was previously fragmented deliberately, architecturally designed to be separated and live separate lives, even with the location of everything that has to do with life and existence in the 21st century. And that is still persisting. So architecture in the formation of identity has sort of carried, even the previous apartheid architecture is still up and running now. And it's still having an influence on people's identities, which now has an influence.
We're going to get into this conversation.
We're carrying on. This is part 2.